Welcome to the Yellow Brick Road. See, we have some early birds. Audrey. All right. So let's get this show started. So this is my presentation today is entitled Jamaica's Yellow Brick Road Towards Entrepreneurship Success, Business/Investment Opportunities for 2024. I just like to acknowledge all the persons this evening that came out. I'd like to acknowledge my team, Miss Dominique Martin, our colleague Rowan Johnson, who is a fellow consultant as well. And I see Lauren on, I see Faith from my colleague from SBAJ. I see Chantel, my banker. I see Charmaine. I see Diane. Welcome all guys. I hope to make this a very interactive presentation this evening. So without further ado, let me commence. So I know you can see my slides, but I'm just trying to bring up the presentation on my end. Okay. All right, so this topic, it's quite fitting based on Jamaica's present situation. We've now fully recovered from the onslaught of COVID-19. And this is sort of a thesis that I have been looking at for the better part of 10 years. And as we go through the presentation, you will begin to understand why. We'll make the presentation as interactive as possible. There are a few questions that I believe there's a poll feature. I'm not sure if it is possible to use, but if not, we will use the chat function and the Q&A function just to foster discussion as I go along during the presentation. You don't have to wait until the presentation is over to pose your chat. Dominique is here, Rowan is there to also help with some of the answers so we can have a fulsome discussion. I know matters of the economy can tend to be full of jargon, sort of very rigid, but I will really like to make it very palatable today, and so as not to be very stiff-necked, for lack of a better word. So just a little bit about Frontier Advisory, Business Advisory. We're a full-service business and financial advisory firm. So what sets us apart? We are really scaling consultants. We're about growing micro, small, and medium enterprises to large-scale companies. The truth is, if small businesses are the engine for economic growth, and I'm an economist, it means that they must grow. If they remain small, then they won't grow. Then the economy won't grow, because the economy is made up of individuals and firms, individuals and businesses. And that is how we will grow as an economy. So we do from whether it's a large-scale enterprise, whether it's a startup, looking for financial clarity, looking just for general guidance in the market, whether it is just to navigate. I will always say that the Shelley and Fraser Prices of this world, the Usain Bolts, the Asafa Powell, countless other athletes, it's not that they didn't know how to sprint or run fast, but they still had coaches to keep them balanced, to keep them grounded, and keep them on a certain trajectory. You can have growth, but if the growth isn't steady, if it isn't consistent, then it can be problematic, as we will see as we go through this presentation. And our tagline is breaking barriers to do business, because at the end of the day, we know this marketplace, much like many others in the emerging world, it's quite difficult to do business at times, especially for small business owners. So it's a 5-part presentation. Part 1 deals with history of what I consider Jamaikanomics, right? Let me let me see here if I can create the poll. So I'm just going to type the question. You can type it in the chat or you can respond to the poll. So what is Jamaikanomics? Well, that field. You want to help me out, Dominique? So you can type it in the chat, guys. What is Jamaica? What do you think is Jamaikanomics? Okay, so I'm not sure if anybody answered in the chat, but as we go along, we will come back to that. Right? So Jamaikanomics is really a play on three words: Jamaica, anomaly, and economics. Right? That should give you some indication as to what it is about. Then we look at Jamaica's economic miracle. I would say economic miracle of sorts. Trends in the productive sectors. Business growth opportunities for 2024, sorry, and beyond. And part 5, where we have a discussion, you're able to pose your question or some of the questions that you would have posed up front. I'll be able to go through and answer them in more details. So Jamaikanomics. The Jamaikanomics is really the history of volatile exchange rates and extremely high inflation in Jamaica and low or no growth, low or negative growth even. There's another term for it, secular stagflation, right? In doing economics at the university level, there's always this notion of all else equal. So economic theory will say that if interest rates are high, then investments will be low. And investment in this case is talking about the productive economy. So when you start a business, when you build a house, right? And even in some cases, when you buy a new vehicle or a new asset, right? It is adding value. Now, if it's not adding value, it doesn't count as economic value. It might have financial value, but it doesn't necessarily have economic value. Now, when we look at Jamaica's varying variables such as unemployment, GDP growth, which we'll see some of the graphs shortly, it's usually not adding up, and we wonder why. When interest rates are low in Jamaica, investments are still low. And when interest rates are high, they are still low. So it's always a case of what is happening. Why is Jamaica so different? All right. So Jamaica has not grown for the better part of 60 years. And I say that because average growth in Jamaica, who can tell me what average growth in Jamaica has been like? And I dare say the person who has the closest answer may get a prize. And this time I'm going to check the chat myself. 0.2%, 1%. Rowan, I feel like you shouldn't answer, Rowan. I feel like I should disqualify you. Give somebody else a try. But let me tell you, growth in Jamaica has been at a minimal 1.4% on average. What does that mean? It simply means if you look at a straight line, that's almost the growth of Jamaica. And that's a horizontal line. If you look at a horizontal line going right across, is that really growth? It's not. Because growth would look something like this. It curves, it shapes upward. But there's really no movement except that it's going in, and we don't even know which direction it's going in. It's not moving. It is more static. So Jamaica simply has not grown. So what do? It's what the yellow brick road towards entrepreneurial success. So small businesses are the engine for growth, as I mentioned earlier. And this history of extremely volatile exchange rate, interest rates has really stymied Jamaica's growth. Now let us look at a little bit of our history, right? In 1939, did you know Jamaica had what was called a currency board? You know what them call customs? The currency board was like customs. Them no drop no catch. Very rigid, very robust. And truth be told, maybe at the time, that is what was needed for Jamaica's economy. But eventually, it was replaced, right? In 1969, there was the Jamaican pound sterling. Well, the pound sterling was actually replaced. I don't want to announce anybody's age, but I know some of us who are on the more mature side may know of what I'm talking about. I don't personally know. Is hear me here. In 1971, however, it was the end of what was called the Bretton Woods system of exchange rate. Fixed exchange rate really came in about in 1944 in terms of the gold standard. So countries would have been able to print money to the tune of the amount of gold that they had. The International Monetary Fund, which is an interesting organization, Jamaica has had quite a storied relationship with the International Monetary Fund due to the fact that we have, by and large, suffered, I would say, bitter medicine, as one prime minister would say, from the, I would say, the policies of the International Monetary Fund. There are other issues such as the international oil crisis of 1973 that would have negatively impacted Jamaica's economy and makes for one difficult situation for the country to actually develop. Not just grow, but develop. Now let's look closer at what Jamaikanomics really mean. So I have 4 different graphs, and don't be worried by the size and shape. The top one really reflects Jamaica's volatile inflation rate. Now, let me see a show of hands for those who understand what is real GDP compared to nominal GDP, right? Show them hands. I will see them a bit later. But let me show you the connections. So, to a certain degree, and you'll hear it in the BOJ at the Bank of Jamaica ads, low, stable inflation. So a certain degree of inflation is actually needed in the economy for growth. Because think of it this way. You're a business owner. What is the incentive do you have to produce, whether it's a good or a service? Think of farmers. So now maybe it's difficult to get yellow yam. Maybe it's because of drought. Maybe there was just not enough planters. Maybe there was a storm, right? Maybe there was some disease. 6 months later, you find a lot of yellow yams. It simply means demand and supply. So on one end, the price of yams extremely high when there is little to no supply. Persons will be willing, me and you, will be willing to pay a little extra to get it. Months later, when the market is able to respond in terms of supply, yellow yam supply goes all the way up. Now, the market doesn't necessarily need as much, so the price is going to fall. In the same sense, that is sort of the push-pull factor that we have with inflation. Notwithstanding, a lot of our inflation in Jamaica is called cost push. Two reasons. We are a small open economy, and a lot of our resources, our raw material resources, are actually import. When you think about oils, oil and gas, which goes into everything, production, transportation, right? Keeping your light on. All of these things are influenced by one major factor, or a collective resource, oil and gas. So whether it's heavy crude oil, whether it's LNG, they're all the same for this context. They come under they come under energy, and Jamaica does not produce any of these things. And it is actually our major importation. There's a lot of other consumer items that we also don't produce. There are also items. This is now the second part of why we have such a high inflation. There is also import for final goods. So we produce a lot of products in Jamaica, but where are those raw materials actually originating from? They're originating outside of the economy. So for that reason, you see these red lines go up and down, and they go all the way up, and sometimes they barely come down. You look at the green line, that's really the trend. But bear with me now. In the late 1960s to early 1970s, you realize at the blue line, at real GDP, there is actually growth, significant growth. To this point, we have never had this kind of growth. And there was one finance minister who would be very braggadocious, saying, oh, in our time, in our tenure, we had growth of over 10%. And I'm like, for who? Because the point I wanted to make at the time was that the growth was not all-encompassing. Jamaica has had serious issues of distribution of wealth. And so even though the growth was a lot in terms of year over year, it was not spread. The economy was a lot smaller at the time. But bear with me now. Using the same dynamics of push and pull in inflation, a little inflation goes a long way to increase demand. So you would see the uptick in terms of GDP, real GDP we're talking here. But as soon as inflation reaches a certain point, real GDP begins to decline. It's the same case with the yams. We would be okay with buying yam maybe at $400 a pound. But what if it got to 500? What if it got to 1,000? Some people would still buy it, but not everyone. So that dynamics now causes a decline. It causes a decline in demand, and it causes also a decline in production, because demand and production, they work hand in hand. If there's no demand, why would you want to produce? You're literally asking to produce something that is not, that won't be sold, and especially if they're perishable goods, they're going to spoil. So that's the kind of push and pull factor. That's the kind of relationship real GDP has with inflation. Now we go over to the right, to the top right, and I will tell you that is called the BOJ's policy rate. Now, what is the policy rate? Anybody in the chat can tell me what is the policy rate? I'll go right ahead. The policy rate is the baseline interest rate. So if you think of the exchange rate being the price of the dollar, the price of the Jamaican dollar is the exchange rate. The price of money is the interest rate. So the price of all interest rate in Jamaica, or the baseline, is the BOJ's policy rate. And I'm going to explain. The policy rate currently as we speak, right? It was last updated in September 2023 at the BOJ's Monetary Policy Committee, it's at 7%. It's been held at 7% now for maybe almost a year, maybe just over a year, based on the graph. What is the interest rate on a bank loan? The regular interest rates on a bank loan, especially unsecured, and I know I have a few bankers in the midst, ranges from anywhere from 16% to 21%. Give or take, you may have a few lower, you may have a few higher, right? You will maybe have a secured loan. Let's say it's a car loan. Let's say it's a mortgage. It may range from around 6 or 7% to up to 9 or 10. In fact, a lot of the banks started to move in their interest rates late last year and midway last year because of the BOJ's policy. Interest rate was moved from roughly 0.5 all the way up to 0.7. And we say 0.5%. So that's like 50 cents. So think about it. Moving from 50 cents to 7%. You see that kind of increase? If you look at the graph, you can see it's an extremely big increase. That kind of increase has the impact of sending the economy into a recession. Notwithstanding, bear with me. The argument I'm trying to put forward here is that for every time the economy increased, especially in the 1990s, because the BOJ policy data goes to not as far back as the inflation data, it goes back to April 1994. But if you look at where the economy was in 1994, the economy began to go into a tailspin. With inflation out of hand, the BOJ sought to increase its policy interest rate. Now, here the point I'm trying to make. If at the end of 1995, the BOJ's policy rate was almost 50%, can you imagine what banks were charging at the time for their interest rate? Using the same logics. Using the same logics, right? If the policy rate currently is 7% and interest rates are at 16 and 21%, as high as that and potentially higher, can you imagine what interest rates were at the time? They may have been even 100%. So tell me something now. If interest rates were at 100% for every dollar, and you had a lump sum of money, let's say you had $10 million, why would you need to work? All you would have to do is put the money in the bank and go and relax, and you'd earn off your interest. So what it did was create what I consider a lazy economy. Added to this, although not depicted here in the graph, the government also had to borrow. Now, the government borrows using what? Taxes. The government pays its debt by taxes rather. But how does the government, finance itself? Besides taxes, it borrows. It borrows on me and you's behalf, right? Which means that the government sells bonds, it sells treasury bills, and who will have to pay for that? Taxes. So we have been in an economy that year over year, we're taxed, inflation is high, growth is low, and we can see it by all these three graphs, and the interest rates keep getting higher. So savers benefit, but non-savers don't benefit. So if you had a loan during the time, you would have to be selling almost down to your shirt. God forbid. And it's true. It happened to a lot of persons. That is what would have happened. And I dare say, FINSAC destroyed up to 3 generations and counting of entrepreneurs. Now, going to our nominal GDP, if we look at nominal GDP, that is the size of our economy. So our economy is roughly valued at, round it up, 15 billion US dollars. Now, if you think of that in the larger context of things, an economy that is valued at 15 billion US dollars, is it really valuable? Think on it. How many billionaires we know of? How many billionaires do we know of? I heard there's a question in the chat. So how many billionaires do we know of? I'll get to you a little later, Garfield. Very good question. I know Garfield was going to come and ask questions in. So I'll get to that a little later, right? So if we think of how many billionaires we know, the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world, Bill Gates have a bad rap. Elon Musk is very mercurial. Jeff is another quite wealthy guy. They are worth umpteen times the value of Jamaica. So if we begin to look at the value of Jamaica, we'd realize that we are not even scratching the surface of what is possible. 1 US billionaire worth multiples of Jamaica. And so the relationship between real GDP now and nominal GDP, real GDP represents production and nominal GDP represents prices. Take the value of a car, one singular car, 2 persons want to buy it. Car priced in normal times at $5. Both persons have $5 each, but both of them want the same car. So what will happen, right? It may very well have, and they're not necessarily going to share it. So what will happen, maybe one will have to lend the other one the $5, and that becomes $10. So one car worth $5, no value added, becomes $10. And that is the story of inflation. So that is really, in essence, in a simplified way, the difference between real GDP and nominal GDP. So for years gone by, nominal GDP has grown up to 14 going 15 billion US dollars. So where has that money gone? It has gone in the hands of wealthy business people, many of whom are not even Jamaicans. Those are called leakages. And that is why Jamaicanomics and Jamaica's economy has continued to just hemorrhage. I continue. FINSAC spoke a bit of it earlier. So in 1985, under the tutelage, I will say, of our multilateral partners, IMF, the World Bank, the Jamaican government began a program to gradually remove its interest rate restriction. Because Jamaica was basically an economy of restrictions, exchange rate restrictions. You couldn't just buy foreign exchange just like that, and you couldn't buy more than a certain amount. But what did that lead to? Black market, right? Some of us here may have heard of it. I wouldn't say take part, but you would have at least heard of it. We also are signatories to many international treaties, such as the World Trade Organization. It simply means that Jamaica had to become a place not just to do business for us Jamaicans, but to do business in the world. Means that some of the protectionist policies at the time that would have been protecting local businesses had to be done away with. So there we go, the pre-liberalization stage. And many of these controls sort of tapered down right until the point of the 1990s, early 1990 in particular, when full-scale liberalization took place. And that is where all hell, as they would say, broke loose. The dollar was allowed to float, relatively speaking. And the problem is, when you problem between fix and float, either way, you have to be producing. And I say you have to be producing, you have to be exporting, you have to be earning, you have to be earning foreign currency. Because if you're not earning foreign currency, you won't have foreign currency to trade, you won't have foreign currency to pay your international partners. Think of it this way. We have items in our Amazon cart. We don't have any money on our Visa debit or Visa credit or even MasterCard or some other card for that matter. How will we get our goods? We won't. They'll be cancelled, right? And so that was a situation that faced Jamaica. That was the exact situation. High debt, high interest rates, high inflation, zero to no growth. And it continued. Notwithstanding, there was a lot of financial speculation happening that time. So there seemed to be growth. Let me go back one slide. Nominal growth, nominal GDP. So these are high inflation. If you look here, this is the 1990s. You see that dip? That's a recession right there, right? But at the same time, Jamaica's economy nominally was growing. Why is that? Inflation, right? So when you look at that, the financial sector in the between 1985 and the early 1990s, the financial sector actually doubled. I kid you not. But all of those were just paper assets, not backed by productivity. If we look around New Kingston, which is maybe now getting older Kingston, most of those buildings were actually built just before the financial meltdown of the 1990s. And so we continued into what, as I said before, is called secular stagnation. Inflation reached a high of almost 80%, making not just an overall level of price increases in the economy, but an increase in the price of money or the cost of capital. So entrepreneurs could not do business. Entrepreneurs could not borrow. Entrepreneurs could not pay their debt. And that was the sticky situation that many of us and our families and our relatives suffered during the 1990s. So it's all there. Successive development loans failed. They failed to drive loan. The development loans, they ring a bell. World Bank, IDB, ring a bell, failed miserably, right? The government attempted to liberalize many public enterprises. We could think of all of the various things, the free zone, the factories that were closed down, all of them. All of those just unraveled, and it still did not prevent us from going into an economic bind. So the Financial Adjustment Company, also known as FINSAC, I dare say FINSAC, was formed in 1996. And thereafter, the Jamaica Deposit Insurance Corporation was formed in 1998, a company that I had the privilege of working, and the Financial Services Commission was formed in 2001. So Jamaica did not just have what is called a banking crisis. It was not even a financial crisis. It was an full-blown economic crisis with social issues attached. So liberalization, as I said earlier, more than doubled the financial sector. So persons who had their money in banks as savers could have sat on the beach, drinking their favorite drink and enjoying life. But if you're not in that position, you could very well be in a completely different situation. And as time goes by, the economy, in terms of the financial system, became stronger because at the time, previous to that, regulations were more relaxed. I heard, this is hearsay, you could just get up and go start a bank. It was that easy, right? But while things improved, the banking system became more concentrated. And we can see remnants of that today. The two biggest banks, they're almost too big to fail. And that in itself brings with it different challenges. So the financial system became more concentrated, and the government at the time borrowed. So how we think the government find umpteen billions to pay for FINSAC? Where did the money come from? Taxpayers' dollar. Borrow money from IMF, borrow money from World Bank, borrow money from IDB, and who's going to pay for it? Me and you and Dupree. And so that was the issue, the essence of what we called crowding out effect. Because the government, once you borrow, interest rate, again, it's demand and supply. You borrow most of the money in the economy, it means that little to no money is left to lend to anybody else. And so it spiraled interest rates to continue high. High debt, high interest rate, and nobody else can do business. And it was really crippling. Crippling to the point where Jamaica's economy at one point almost debt to GDP ratio was almost 150%. Now, fast forward 2008, 2009, this was the start of another serious situation. Now, I want us to let you guys to lend me your eyes for a second again. If you look here at 2009, you will see the implication of the 2009 recession. Very drastic. It's even worse, impacted us worse in terms of a decline in real GDP, more so than FINSAC. The difference, I will say, FINSAC had more long-lasting effects. But in terms of a direct decline on GDP, the 2008-2009 recession had a more serious financial impact. Now, I would say one of the reasons for this is that I don't know if anyone here remembers one particular finance minister who said that, oh no, man, Jamaica is good, where we won't be affected by the recession. Tutus, we had what was called the Jamaica Debt Exchange, right? Who remember that? The Jamaica Debt Exchange, which was launched in January 2010, right? And then the National Debt Exchange. It was simply put a reduction of interest rates on bonds that were typically purchased on our behalf by insurance companies, pension funds, and other institutional investors, and I dare say wealthy individuals. Now, what that does, it is considered a technical default. A full default would mean that the government would have not paid its principal, but instead of that, it decided to ask for a reduction in the interest rates and move the tenures of these bonds. So let's say the bonds were to be maturing in the next 10 years. These tenures were moved to between 15 and 20 years to give the government some leeway to pay down its debt. And that is the situation that Jamaica found itself in. If it was not for those debt swaps, if it was not for this continuous sacrifice of individual Jamaicans, Jamaica would have been on a certainly sticky path. But them say, well, from bad come good things. It is the minister himself who says, for us Jamaicans to realize our economic independence that we deserve, we must make products, craft, and services that can sell around the world. Senator Albin Hill, who I would say is sort of an evangelist for investments. And when I say investments, we're talking about business, the business of investments. So building businesses, exporting, right? So when we look at this, the government of Jamaica got to the point where it simply could not afford to pay its debt. And successive governments had to take hard decisions. Remember the bitter medicine that was advertised, I believe, in 2009, and we didn't believe, right? Eventually, assets such as Air Jamaica, we've seen uh, other sales taking place, the coffee factories, there are more divestments to come, government agencies merging, and those are all part of what is called structural adjustments. We've recently seen a public sector reformation. There was a pension reform as well. There was times before, and no offense to anybody in the public sector, but there was times before persons in the public sector weren't actually putting funds towards their pension. And that in itself would have impacted the government's wage bill. So we look to some of the trends. We fast forward the debt swaps, the bitter medicine. All right, so we look at some of these variables. We see unemployed, well, we look at the consumer price index, which is the measure used to ascertain inflation in the economy, right? Now, the CPI is really made up of a theoretical basket of goods. I say theoretical because there have been questions as to whether or not, as leeching in the chat, whether or not statin is actually using the updated methods. I'm not saying they are, I'm not saying they're not, right? But questions have been posed. So I say it's a theoretical basket of goods and services that goes into the basket. And we can see where inflation was elevated. But let me tell you, there's been an issue with inflation globally. And that is because of the 2008-2009 recession, where the government, especially in the United States, actually print money to sort of rescue the economy. Some person might say to rescue big banks, but we can discuss that a little further later on in the presentation. We see unemployment rate. In fact, Jamaica now has had historic lows in terms of unemployment. Unemployment currently is around 4.5%, and that's figures as of June 2023, where the the unemployment rate is at its lowest it has ever been. One of the things I failed to mention earlier was that Jamaica became a poster child, of the economy of the IMF, because there has been no single country in the world who has been able to move from 150% debt to GDP ratio within the last 10 years to now roughly 96%. There's been no other country in the world. In 2015 and 2018, Jamaica also had the distinction of the world's best performing stock market. And those are tremendous accomplishments, especially in line with the fact that we were significantly hemorrhaging just a few years prior. Now we look at growth in real GDP. As I said before, we can look here. This is stemming from the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we can see the dip in the graph. The international trade has relatively remained the same. So whether it's COVID or not COVID, the trade deficit. So I want us to understand that here, these are not just numbers. These graphs represents opportunities for us as entrepreneurs to be exporting goods and services to close this gap. And I dare say, close and let us become an export-driven economy where our export will significantly outweigh our imports. So trends in the productive sectors, goods and services. Now, when we look at our economy since the peak, because they would say COVID still a keep, right? So since the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, our economy has largely reopened almost as if it was never a thing, was never closed. However, we see where tourism and entertainment, we see where the related services, we see where travel in terms of Airbnbs, to the point where Airbnbs have been causing a fuss in terms of new legislation, maybe on the cards. But that is an indication, to show that the industry has been doing significantly well. Government want to get involved when things are going well. So the economy actually grew by 2.3% during the September quarter. And so that speaks to a significant effort by us as a collective to really grow our way. All right, so I was giving the wrap up for this segment, right? So let me just go quickly through. So economic continuous growth. We look at industry opportunities. So hotel and restaurants and entertainment. There's a transport, storage and communication sector. BPO comes to mind. There's wholesale and retail. There's agriculture. There's forestry, there's fishing, there's agro-processing, there's value added, there's construction. We go all around Kingston and St. Andrew. And I'd say in the wider Jamaica, there's construction of new highway. And I can say safely, I can personally attest to the difference that it has made in terms of the time to travel and increases in productivity. Communication, storage services. So the economy at this point is abound with opportunities. Trends in the goods production sector. So we look at these graphs without worrying about the particular level, Just look at the trend. Where is it going? It's pointing one direction, up. And so Jamaica is in that time zone now. After all of the debacles with high debt, low growth, high and unstable inflation and exchange rate, interest rates as well, we are now stable and growing. Forward with me on the yellow brick road. Trends in the services sector. So we look at services because many times we look at exporting, we think of a physical good. But Jamaicans are known for services as well. We've been doing, doing well in the performing arts, right? There's need for managers. There's need for other business professionals, right? There is sports tourism. There's a whole host of related areas that we can, there's virtual remote working, virtual services, a bit of which we will look to in the coming slides as well. So the important thing here is to look at some of the general trends. All right. So, of course, this is, I would say, the part of the presentation that we have really come to discuss. Business growth opportunities for 2024 and beyond. So we look at some of the major sectors. The Internet of Things. So COVID-19 has accelerated our digital economy. And I realize that most of us are back at work. You see the traffic on the road. Remote work is still a thing though. Web3 is a thing. Non-fungible tokens is a thing. The Internet of Things is a thing. When you think of the Internet of Things, what comes to mind? The proliferation of artificial intelligence, machine learning, things like Bitcoin, distributed ledger, decentralized finance. And I spent a number of years in finance, researching and investigating aspects of financial technology. But I will tell you, financial technology hasn't just disrupted finance. It is disrupting every industry. And so every sector has to now be looking at how do we keep abreast of the latest technologies that are there on offer. The orange economy, as I mentioned briefly, Kingston is a cultural capital. There's a significant push to redevelop downtown Kingston and its environs and their ripple effects for the wider economy. We mentioned travel and entertainment earlier as well. There's a transshipment. We heard about the logistics hub. Haven't seen enough progress, but what I can dare say is that Jamaica is situated very strategically between the Panama Canal and one of the biggest markets in the world, the United States and the wider North America, which includes Canada. Mexico is also a significantly huge market, one of the largest economies in the world, actually. So there's huge potential for many of these things. And if you think that you can't start a business process outsourcing business, a data center, look at ITL BPO, which is a Jamaican-owned company and has been showing significant growth. Buzzword, the Great Reset, the Great Resignation, things like silent quitting. Mention flexible working, well, remote working, flexible working, same thing. So we've really moved from a stage of basic globalization to, in a sense, deglobalization, but can we really be deglobalized? To digitization, I would say digitalization. So if you look at it, the Airbnb, the small hotelier, the big hotelier, everybody competing for the same pot. And so some of these little issues will continue to play out. And it will be interesting times going ahead to see some of the new level of disruptions. In fact, quick story. In 2008, another recession, right? Two struggling entrepreneurs, struggling to pay their rent, decided that they were going to rent out air mattresses in their apartment. You know which company was created? Type it in the chat. Agroparks, agro-processing, nutraceutical, cosmeceutical, the exports of goods and services. And I can tell you, things like Jamaican castor oil is a brand by itself. Jamaican castor oil is a thing. You have people who are neither Jamaicans by birth nor hereditary who propose to be producing Jamaican castor oil, who, as I said, they don't have any connections to Jamaica, and the oils did not come from Jamaica. And that is the sort of brand that is there. Brand Jamaica has its place in the wider world, and it's for us individually and collectively to take advantage of that. We look at some of the risk, and I'm not here to tell you that starting a business, scaling your business is not without a risk. But they'll say don't waste a good recession, as I just told or shared the story of Airbnb. There's the matters of high interest rate. There are bank fees. And boy, we've been hit with bank fees in Jamaica. Unstable Jamaican dollar, right? High debt to GDP ratio and high energy costs, which we consider a huge structural issue. Okay, so to really support this growth, there are a lot of government agencies, and they are able no more than ever to help with varying levels of capacity building and funding. The list isn't exhaustive, but a few of them stand out. JIPO for intellectual properties. Factories Corporation, you're looking for office space, warehouse space, productive space. There's a Jamaica promotion. They say do business, right? There's a JBDC. Today I was at a JBDC workshop, right? There's a hard trust NSTA, and it's now free to do a hard course up to the associate degree. Take advantage of that. There's a scientific research council. They will actually turn your ideas into products. There's a Bureau of Standards, right? If we're going to export, there are certain minimal standards that are expected. And there's funding. There's a lot of funding. So a lot of funding, I say this all the time, a lot of funding comes down from the World Bank and its subsidiaries. You have the International Financial Corporation, right? You have the International Development Bank, the IDB. You have IDB Invest, and you have IDB Lab. IDB Lab is actually geared towards the MSME sector. They are not sometimes the first means of contact. However, there are a lot of opportunities here if you position yourself, which really leads me into the discussion phase as to how we can help. What can you do? Where can you begin? And just the list is there. There's a Jamaica DRC Pitch Room. There's Kingston Creative, right? There's the MSME Business Roadshow, right? There's one coming up in Kingston on the 21st. There's Kingston Beta for tech enthusiasts as well. And all of them have their little pitch competitions where you can win or earn up to $300,000. And I would say it's not so much. $300,000 in a grand scheme of things might not be a lot of money. However, it is the exposure that your business will get. Your business potentially could find an investor to push it to the next level. And this is where I'm at now, the discussion phase. All right. So I see Charmaine there with Airbnb was created. So you think you deserve a prize, Charmaine? Or I don't even know who was the first to say it, but we'll get to that. So how can we help? So Frontier Business Advisory was started for this very purpose, right? I started as an investment-driven person, saying that I'm going to invest not just on the stock market, but I'm going to invest in real companies. And we are about investing in people. We invest in people as much as the business they operate, because ultimately it's the people who run those businesses. However, when we look at the marketplace, so many businesses, they're operating for years, they're either not registered, they're registered, never did business plans, never did a strategic plan, and they don't update them if they do them, and they don't have they don't have even basic policies in place. They're not tax compliant. And I dare say not becoming tax compliant or becoming a part of the tax net is actually a disservice to yourself and your business, because there are a lot of opportunities for grants, a lot of opportunities for financing. But if you're not registered, if you're not tax compliant, if you don't have a business plan, then you're defeating yourself. So Frontier, we offer from our basic service, I would not basic, but we would say for the startup entrepreneur, we'd introduce our strategic business plan. For more tried and tested businesses who are looking to now go to the next level in terms of growth, we would recommend what is called business and financial advisory, which not limited to, but could include corporate finance, how to raise capital, how to raise whether it's a debt raise, whether it is a bond, whether it's equity. And what we will do, we will work in your corner, providing tailored solution and that personal touch to get your business to the next level. It goes without saying, as I said earlier in the presentation, think of a Usain Bolt, think of a Shelley and Fraser Price, think of a, Elaine Thompson here, right? And she went to my high school, so is my athlete as well. But think of Elaine and Elaine not paying the coach. Don't quote me on that. The point I'm trying to make, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you want to grow, then you have to stand out of your own way. Very important. So let me see now, which questions are there for me? All right, so all right, so I'm waiting on your question, Garfield, to just be posted in the Q&A section for me to respond to it. In the meantime, if anyone else have any questions, they can put it in the Q&A section. Okay, so economic situation, conditions that are specific to Jamaica and may go against traditional economics. But this sounds more like a statement. So economic situations, conditions that are specific to Jamaica and may go against. I don't see a higher rate of interest on my savings, but an increase in the amount I'm paying for my loan. Why is that? Very good question, Garfield. So my way to answer this question is that following, remember, how did Jamaica come to become a low interest rate environment? It all started back, as I explained earlier, from the 2008-2009 recession. The economy was at its worst, went over a cliff, right? And that debt swap or exchange in terms of the reduction on our bonds, our government bonds, was what led to a reduce in government borrowing. Remember, I talked about crowding out effect. And subsequently, the BOJ's policy rate started to decline significantly. I can refer back to the graph, earlier graph. Now, after that decline in interest rates, in the policy interest rates, you think the banks all of a sudden decide, say, oh, they weren't going to charge people 20 and 30% on them loan? No. The minister himself had to come out publicly, not privately. So I'm sure he would have met with them privately, but he had to come out publicly and coerce them to push down these rates. So I say to you, the rates that you're not seeing is a matter of competition. More and more, you see Jamaicans now are actually asking for more. They're actually moving their business. So if people are deciding, say, okay, well, a certain bank taking my money as deposit and not giving me any higher interest rate, you have the right to move your money. You might not be able to move your loan readily, but what if you can get another bank to refinance it? I can say I've personally done that. But unless people are actually taking stock of these things, they will continue to take their own time to move up the savings rate, and they will quickly move the loans rate, because you have to understand, the difference between those two is what the banks use as profit. So the banks are really profit-making entities, and unless there is an authority which BOJ regulates and supervises banks, but it does not regulate their prices. And so much like the OUR that regulates utilities, there's no such regulator for the banks in terms of their prices. So unless we demand better as consumers, we will continue to see some of those, sadly. Best case, move your business. Okay. So is it possible? I'm seeing Audrey's question. I'm not sure I'm seeing Rowan's question. Is it possible to share consultation fee or break down the fees for services for surveys and business plans. All right. So there are various fees. Thank you for the question, Arjun. There's various fees. So a flat consultation fee would be 30,000 Jamaican dollars, right? Or 200 US. And that would involve two separate consultations, 2 hours, pretty much, give or take. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little less. Sometimes 45, I would say 45 minutes to an hour per session. Now, it depends on the type of business that you're doing. Because if you're, let's say you're doing a company formation, that may involve registering the business, advice on the idea in terms of working through your business model, doing a business plan document, and any other document. You mentioned surveys, market research, etc. And that would involve more of a package price. Sometimes for those clients, I will go ahead and actually waive the consultation fee because you're purchasing a much larger service or product. So you would, in essence, you get to negotiate. But if you're just coming to discuss maybe an idea or an existing business, that is the standard rate. So the rates will be subjected to the service that you're doing, really. Business plans on a whole, though, start at 1,000 US, which is roughly $150,000. And I say start because every business is different, right? Notwithstanding, though, I have done business plans from micro businesses at negotiated prices. And I say negotiated, so those prices don't necessarily stay the same for each client. Things like business valuations, financial statement analysis. And I'll say for financial statement analysis, sometimes person may wonder, why should you do it? But how do you know that your business is actually profitable? Your business might be profitable in terms of a number, but how do you know that you're actually making money? How do you know that your business is operating efficiently? And that is what a financial statement analysis does. It's basically ratio analysis, and it could go as deep as what is called discounted cash flow valuation, which is a means of valuing your business, typically for businesses that are looking investors. So, Rowan, in terms of whether it is valid, the importation of workers, it's difficult for me to say it is valid. What I'll say, though, is that the minute we see that being advertised, and I said it to a colleague earlier this week, once you've seen it making the news, it means that it has been happening already. There's been a lot of Asian workers, for example, on our highways. But even earlier today, while on the road, I was on Spanish Town Road, actually. And I said to myself, for those of us who are familiar, right? And I've been on it recently, it is atrocious. Do we recall that Spanish Town Road was being worked on much recently, as recent as when the Hagley Park Road project was being done? And it begs me to wonder, it would not be the Chinese. I laughed to myself and I said that to this day, the Chinese are still working on the North-South Highway. And it's a testament that even if it wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, they are trying to improve it gradually. I don't see any such work taking place on the Spanish Town Road. So that is only one example of several that are out there. But I think sometimes we too are our own enemies. There's a case that though many of these employers actually don't want to pay their workers. And having been employed for the better part of 17 years, I can safely say that most of us are underemployed in Jamaica. So if I could use that as a case, I could say, well, it may be not valid, but I think this is a case where we, the citizens of the country, must let our voices be heard. I think it's as simple as that. So thank you for that question, Lorna. So the BOJ formally is the central bank, which much of my discussion today focused on monetary policy, right? Jamaica's monetary policy. It's been a topic that I've long studied, get excited and get unexcited over. So the BOJ as a central bank is responsible for monetary policy. Monetary policy is responsible for price stability. And in doing so, the BOJ is responsible for what is called inflation targeting, where it has a price range for inflation. At one point, it was between 4 to 6. I think it has moved a bit now, maybe not. It's so using the 4 to 6 range, inflation at roughly, I believe, 8% would be, give or take, just outside of the range. Now, the BOJ is also the regulator and supervisor of banks, which means that it is responsible to ensure that orderly conduct, and I say orderly conduct, it means that banks are holding down a certain amount of reserves just in case persons come for their money, depositors like ourselves come for their money. They're being operated, they're not committing fraud, right? So the BOJ is also responsible for that. The BOJ is also what is called a lender of last resort, which means that if a bank should encounter difficulties, the BOJ has what is called an emergency liquidity facility that can save these banks. Doesn't mean it's going to save every bank, and it doesn't mean that the banks are going to take it up. Because we've seen times before when that facility, even in the pandemic, the facility was made available and none of the banks actually took it up. And finally, the BOJ is also the government's banker. So in doing being the government's banker, the BOJ also is responsible for both purchasing bonds or financial assets on behalf of the government and also selling them likewise. I'd also like to cap the statement by saying BOJ almost regulates everything, because now BOJ has basically taken, and I hope this is not being recorded, right? I'm being a little mischievous now. But the BOJ has basically taken over FSC. Not formally, but in a sense. If you look on the board of the FSC, the governor of the Bank of Jamaica is on it, right? And there's the man who's running the FSC now has been seconded from the Bank of Jamaica. So essentially what will happen in the not too distant future, BOJ will be responsible for the regulation and supervision of credit unions. They're already responsible for microfinance institutions. They're already responsible for remittances, cambios, right? Other money businesses, banks, billing societies. and I don't think I left any out. So you'll find that the BOJ will become all in all. There's another word I could say, but I won't use it on this platform. So yes, when you look at a country like the United States have an entity. And let me tell you, and this is why. So I responding to Garfield's question, by the way. So let me tell you, right? Many of these organizations, especially when they're in first world countries, they weren't actually started by the government. I will say to you that even central banks weren't started by government, they're started by wealthy individuals. So a lot of lobby groups are in the Washington, D.C. area, for example. And I'm saying this to say that it is in our interest to form many of these lobby groups, or to resurrect many of them, or to strengthen existing ones, to really look for the benefit of things on our behalf. We can't just leave it up to the government. Government is busy trying to win elections, I would say. Government is busy trying to pay down the debt. The government is busy trying to respond to international occurrences. We see what is happening in, or has been happening for a while in the Ukraine. Jamaica has had things to say. We've seen what has been happening in Israel, in Israel-Palestine conflict. The government has had things to say or not to say. And so it is for us as a country, as business people, as business-minded people, as present and future entrepreneurs, I would say, to actually come together and make representation. Because there is a formal way for these things, you know. We can actually put bills before Parliament. We just have to look at the terms of references and the standing orders. There is the Data Protection Act, for example, coming out in December. There would have been a time where we could have submitted proposals. How often do these things happen? Not very often. Sometimes we do see them do when more wealthier individuals will actually challenge some of these laws in court, challenge some of these banks. It is important. So we can actually come together as people and challenge the status quo. So the short answer is yes, these institutions do exist. They do exist in first world countries, but they're not always government agencies. So the government will tell you now that we not have no unemployment crisis, man, because our employment crisis, this is for Rowan, to Rowan's question, simply because we've had no historic low unemployment rate. But we have to contextualize everything. Jamaica has an aging population. We'll have things like coming pension crisis, I believe, right? Maybe even before the unemployment crisis. Because a lot of young Jamaicans will actually leave, have actually been leaving. We have one of the largest percentages of brain drain in the world, right? So a lot of people are leaving, and not just young Jamaicans. I've seen mature families get up and leave. And so it is a crisis, but not necessarily merely a unemployment crisis. It might be more a social crisis, right? And I'm sort of missing the part of the question. But in the meantime, I will say, Rowan, and to the general meeting is that how will we avert this crisis? It's really to build new businesses. Because let me tell you, this is one of the reasons as well I decided to have the webinar. If you think of it this way, Jamaica has not grown because there are no new businesses. There are no new jobs. Everybody will say the only new jobs is BPO. And it's true. It's true to a point. Because when you look at it, do we have any new banks? The presentation was a lot about finance and financial sector. Name one new bank. I dare you. Right? There's none. What does that mean? That's, that's a lack of growth. So you find that larger companies are not going to grow significantly. Even the other day, I see Grace actually bought another company. And when Grace buy another company, what does it do? Lays off workers, implements new technology, pump new money. That's what they do. So the growth and the employment is going to come from small businesses, micro businesses. Micro going to small, small going to medium, medium going to large. That is how employment is going to be created. And I tell you, the numbers don't lie. 97% of our economy are made up of MSMEs. The 3% is the big companies, which most of them are on the stock market, right? And out of that 97%, another 80 to 90%, I would say 90% of that 97% are actually micro enterprises. So we have a huge potential to grow. There are many micro businesses who people are running part-time. They are just run by one man. What if they were run by 2, 3, 4, and they kept growing and expanding with the right technology, with the right structure? There you go. Hope that answered the question. Right, so guys, I really thank you for joining the webinar, right? I would say I could have maybe 2 minutes to respond to another question if there is any. Okay, I think I have another couple of slides actually to just go through. So meet the team at Frontier Business Advice. We have Easton Grant. He's in charge of strategy and accounting. He's a numbers guy like myself, right? And he works around the clock. Maybe that is something that we have in common over here at Frontier. By no means, though, we support holistic balance, work-life balance. Myself, I'm a macro research person. I love numbers, I love business, I love geopolitics. I love politics too, because we don't shy away from the politics. That's what we do over here. We break barriers to do business at Frontier. And of course, the lovely Miss Dominique Martin, who is in charge of business development strategy, agile project management. And if you see the beautiful slides, she is responsible for the slides. So we're here. We have other consultants in the areas of corporate governance, risk, and I'm giving some plugs now. So Rowan is also a business consultant. I saw Faith on the call earlier. Faith is also a business consultant. She's an HR consultant. And we have, many other persons who are within our network. I think I saw Lauren on the call as well. He has skills in AML compliance and, logistics and transportation, you name it. Once you come to Frontier, we have a solution for you, right? And that So Anthony, I beg your pardon, Anthony. Is it possible for you to pose the question in the question and answer? Or Anthony was saying the Chinese have to maintain the North-South Highway. Okay, so Anthony, we could respond via email to your questions because I'm not seeing any here at the moment, but we can speak. We can continue the conversation afterwards. So, all right, so I believe I heard RG and Anthony are the prize winners today. And what I will do, I will choose a random person for the third prize. So you can choose another person. All right, so Charmaine and Yannick. All right, so between Charmaine and Yannick, name two of our services that we offer at Frontier Business Advisory. We offer 4 main categories. And even if you mix up the categories, just give us 2 services and the prize is yours. Consulting and scaling. Well, you win, Charmaine, because you came out first. So yes, I mean, business advisory, I would say we are the business scaling consultants. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the team for the tireless work in putting together this webinar. I hope we were able to, answer some of your questions. We are about building not just financial literacy, but business literacy. And if you should have any further questions, then feel free to reach out to me at the numbers on the slides, or you can send me an email at priesnell@frontierbusinessadvisory.org. Thank you very much.